Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Rachel Morgan. I am one of the program specialists here at the Nebraska Arts Council. You may be familiar with the Nebraska Arts Council and some of the things that we do, but I wanted to just give a very brief overview of our agency and the grant requirements that we have. We are actually the only state agency that their home base is in Omaha. So we are down by the mall on 10th and Farnham, and we are very happy to have the mall done, and we can actually walk through the park now instead of having construction trucks constantly zooming by. You are welcome to visit our office anytime during business hours. And all of the information that we'll go over today is actually on our website. So if we get through this and you want to dig a little deeper, or you want to go back and refresh your memory, everything will be on our website as well. So here's a list of our eligibility requirements. One of the main things I want to point out is the new federal requirement, which was introduced in 2021. All organizations need to have a unique identifier number through sam.gov in order to receive grant funding from the Arts Council. It is free of charge to get this sam.gov number. If you don't have it already, it is okay to go ahead and apply. Once you get into the application, you're going to find links on how to get that information. If it becomes very confusing and you need to reach out to someone, our grants and data administrator, Jennifer, who is on this call also, she can always help you if you need someone to reach out and ask questions. But it is one of the things that I wanted to point out. There is more information also on our website. There's a guide that will walk you through that step by step with screenshots. So there is some material there to help you. So these are the type of things that we look for in projects that we fund. It's not a comprehensive list, but it does give you an idea about our funding priorities. As you can see, artistic excellence, inclusive programming that reaches many audiences, and arts education are among our top priorities. There's also a list of things that we do not fund. And these are some of the things that we get asked most often. So it's kind of a frequently asked question type of list. There is one exception to this list. You'll see on the list that capital improvements, construction or restoration is not funded. We do have a floating deadline grant for improvements that increase ADA accessibility. What we're going to talk about today is the applications that have a set deadline, and that is coming up March 15th. If you're unsure if your project meets that requirement, these are some of the questions that you may want to ask. Is your project budget over $4,000? Do know that the grants, most of them are going to require a dollar for dollar match. So do you have a match lined up? Do you have the dates and locations in place already so you know when your project is going to be happening? And do know that the applications are competitive, which means they go in front of a panel of reviewers. They are not completely staff reviewed. We have outside reviewers who read through them. The floating deadline, which I mentioned earlier, they are usually for grant requests that are $2,000 and under in most cases. So if it's something where you have a smaller budget, the floating deadline might be something that is of more interest. The other nice thing about what we call a floating deadline is that the applications are due 4 to 6 weeks before the project starts. So if you don't have some of those things already in place, like dates and locations and primary partners, Those floating deadlines are nice to have because you have time then to line some of those details up. These are a list of the floating deadline grants that we'll cover in April workshops. There's quite a few of them, and they range from education to community-based. So what we're going to talk about today are projects that happen between July 1st and June 30th, which is our fiscal year. The deadline is going to be March 15th. We do have a fall deadline, and that is October 1st, and that's for anything happening the second half of the fiscal year. So January 1st of 2024 through June 30th of 2024. We do anticipate those grant applications being open early next week, so Monday or Tuesday. You should be able to see those in our grant system. We're going to focus on the top 3 grant applications that you see listed there: the Arts Project, the Arts Learning Project, and Artists in Schools and Communities with a request of over $1,650. There are some invitational grant programs that we have that have this same March 15th deadline, but to be considered for one of those, you need to have a successful track record in these other grant categories of at least 3 or more consecutive years, along with some other requirements. So that's why we're going to focus on the top 3 today. This is the primary criteria that reviewers consider when they read through the grant applications. You'll find additional details in the scoring rubrics, which you'll find in the applications. And each category has a little bit different rubric. And that helps the reviewers assess the applications. The Arts Project Grants is a very broad category. It encompasses many different kinds of productions or events, as you can see on the screen. Do know that this does require a dollar-for-dollar match. So for instance, if you are requesting the maximum amount of $7,500, you will have to have $7,500 in some other sort of cash income. And that could be donations, tickets, business sponsorships, but it can't be in kind. So it can't be things like volunteer hours. So that's something to keep in mind. Outreach that serves Nebraskans is a priority in this category. And do be aware as we go through these different categories today, know that you can apply for one Arts Project grant or one Arts Learning Project grant at each deadline. So you can't do a project grant and an Arts Learning at the same time. If you're unsure about your project and which category it fits in, you can always send us an email or give us a call and we can talk through that if you're unsure. Arts Learning Project grants are also for a wide variety of projects, but they must have an educational emphasis. They can be projects for schools, or they can take place in community settings. Arts Learning Project grants can also involve any age group. So it doesn't have to just be school-age children, it could be adults as well. And the primary target audience, or if the primary target audience for your project is youth, you must apply in the Arts Learning Project category rather than the Arts Project. So one of the things to think about is who your primary target is for your project. The maximum request for most applications in this category is $7,500. However, if you have a project that involves extensive outreach to other communities around the state, or beyond your own community, you can request up to $15,000. grant. That would be something that you'll want to talk to Ann Alston about, who is on our staff, and she oversees this category. So if you're unsure about the request amount, that's definitely something you'll want to talk to her about. Organizations that receive basic support grants are eligible in some cases if the project takes place in schools or if it goes into other communities beyond your own. Once again, that would be a good conversation to have with Ann. If you want to apply for an NAC roster artist to lead an interactive residency for a more extended period of time, and your request is over $1,650, then you would apply at this set deadline. Most applications and requests are going to be under that amount, but there are cases where organizations do an extensive amount of programming, and in that case, this works for them. If it's under $1,650, the request amount, it's going to fall into the floating grant category. So you can still apply. It's just a little bit different. It's not due at the same time. And here you're going to see who to contact if you have questions. So if you get into our grant system and you have technical questions about the system, you'll want to contact our grants and data administrator. If you want to talk about annual series and events, it's Stephanie. Artists in Schools and Communities, it's Josh. Arts project grants or basic support is myself. And arts learning and annual programs is Ann Alston. So while we're here and you've decided that you definitely want to submit a grant application and you're ready to apply, we're going to show you how to get into that system. So you're going to go to our website, which is artscouncil.nebraska.gov. At the top of the screen, it says apply for a grant, and you just click on that and you'll get a drop down, and you'll see on the left-hand side, it says grant system login. And it'll take you then to the grant system. And this is the landing page for that. If your organization has never applied to us before, or at least in the last, say, 4 to 5 years, you can create a new account. If you're unsure and you think your organization may have an account with us, the best idea is to contact our grants and data administrator and see if you already have an account, because having multiple accounts in the system, it gets a little clunky. And so we have to do some work on the back end. So it's much easier just to add someone to an account. If you ever forget your password, because that never happens to us, right? If you ever forget it, there's obviously a little prompt there and it will walk you through how to reset that. So if you're a new organization to the account or to found it, you will get this screen that shows you how all the information that you need to set up your account. The thing to remember is you will need your tax ID. So it's good to have that handy before you get into the system. We do have some more in-depth tutorials on YouTube, especially regarding budgets and strengthening your application. So if you wanted to take a look at those, we do have those available. But here's some general tips. One thing I really want to point out is that you are always welcome to contact us. It is much easier and preferable that you get a hold of us before the submission. Once you hit submit, we're really hands off unless there's a technical issue like a link doesn't open or something to that effect. So if you have questions or you want us to take a look at your application, do that early on. Don't wait till the day before the deadline as well, because we may not have time at that point. And be aware that because that application goes to a panel of reviewers, some of those reviewers may be from out of state. They may not be familiar with your organization, your community, and your project. So you really want to write that application in a way that explains your project and your community very well. You can't assume that they're going to know about it. Here are some quick tips regarding the budget. I would say this is probably where most of the questions come from that we get. And know that the budgets look a little bit different if you're applying for an arts project grant or arts learning project grant compared to the artists in schools and communities. Artists in schools and communities have preset artist fees and have a little bit different requirements. Make sure that the important elements in your narrative and in your budget align. If you've talked about you're hiring 4 artists, but there's just a lump sum for artist fees in the budget, it usually brings up questions in a panel. And it also, if you talk about hiring 4 artists in your narrative, but there's only 3 listed in your budget, once again, things aren't quite lining up. And so that may be a question that comes back from the panel, is that the budget just wasn't very clear and didn't seem to align with the narrative. It's helpful to itemize larger amounts. You can see the example here. They've kind of lumped all the artist fees in together, and you can't really tell how much they're getting paid. Whereas if there's the breakdown, you can see that 5 artists are getting paid $1,000 each, for example. We know that the budget in the grant application is essentially a good faith estimate of all the expenses and income. The budget does need to balance, which means your total expenses and your total income need to match. And just be aware that, once again, we talked about that grant request. If you're asking for $7,500, it needs to have at least that much in the income as well. We also ask for some supporting materials. There are limits to how many support materials. So you want to think through what gives the reviewer the best picture of your project. These include things such as artist bios, a detailed timeline, letters of support, and other materials. You'll want to make sure you pay attention to the requirements for each grant category, because each are just a little bit different as to what they need. So some examples of good support materials are examples of the artist's work that you have involved in the project. And this could be recordings, it could be websites. If you're doing an arts learning project grant, curriculum materials are going to be really important. Letters of support are really good to have from collaborators in your project that you're partnering with. And then the timeline is nice to have specific dates, milestones, and who is responsible for each item. We do provide a template for timelines. You are certainly welcome to use your own, but we do have a template that is linked in the application in case that's helpful. One of the questions we also ask is about evaluation. How do you know if your project is successful? And we ask you that. We're not going to tell you what is successful. What do you consider to be success? Which also ties then to your goals. What goals are you setting for your project, and how do you know if you've met them? So you want to consider those together so that you have a way of assessing how and how well you've met those goals. It's also a nice idea if your project has goals that you can periodically check in on. That way, if you need to reevaluate halfway through, you have time to do that and you're not waiting till the very end. And please let your elected officials know how important public funding of the arts is to you and your community.